Good evening. Today is Saturday, February 29th, 2020. My name is Ricardo Sandoval, and this video is for week 7 of Biology 230. In this week's video, I'll be talking about the gross anatomy of the central nervous system, and its anatomy, of course, and its physiology, what it does. In order to demonstrate that, I'll be dissecting the sheep's brain, which is located here. I'll be going through the anatomy of it, of course, and then what each part does in relation to what it does in the human central nervous system. So with that being said, I will go ahead and get started with the dissection. So I'm going to start with what's called the meninges. So the meninges, it's this tissue here and here. So these little kind of papery flaps on either side of the sheep brain. Now, in humans, the meninges, if you ever get meningitis, it's inflammation or infection of this tissue, which can lead to pain, cognitive deficits, things of that sort. So I'm going to remove these from the brain. So I'm just going to pull gently here. Quite tough, so I'm just going to go ahead and use my scissors to get rid of them. Okay. So meninges are gone. So now we're going to talk about several structures of the brain, and before I go further. So the first structure I'm going to talk about is the cerebellum, and the cerebellum is located here. This is the cerebellum, and the cerebellum in the human central nervous system has several functions that are related to movement and coordination. The next part I'm going to talk about is the frontal lobe, and this is the front of the brain, so these are our frontal lobes. So in human anatomy and physiology, the frontal lobes control important cognitive skills like emotional expression, problem solving, memory, and language. They're called the control panel, if you will, of human personality and the ability to communicate. The next portion, or the next part, is the gyri, and the gyri are, excuse me for just 1 second here. So the gyri are these little ridges, really, kind of the dark lines. Those are the gyri. They're ridges on the cerebral cortex. The longitudinal fissure, the fissure that goes up and down, that divides the two hemispheres of the brain into right and left. So next up are the mammillary bodies. So the mammillary bodies, let's see here. So the mammillary bodies, forgive me here, are right here. This is the mammillary body of the brain. And they're small round bodies. They're part of the diencephalon, the through brain, because it's a connection between the cerebrum and the rest of the nervous system, except for the sense of smell, which comes directly to the cerebrum. And the mammillary bodies, or the diencephalon, I should say, forms part of the limbic system, which is involved with emotion and memory. Next up is the midbrain, and the midbrain is located in the middle, so right about here, midbrain. And the midbrain, it controls motor movements of the eye, and auditory, what I can hear, and the visual processing. Next up are the occipital lobes. And the occipital lobe, or lobes, is here and here, kind of on the back of the brain. The occipital lobes are the visual processing center of the brain. Now we're going to talk about the olfactory bulb. Now, olfactory stands for the sense of smell. And the olfactory bulb is here. This is the olfactory bulb on both hemispheres of the brain. Now, the optic chiasma. The optic chiasma is defined as the X-shaped structure that is formed at a point below the brain where the two optic nerves cross over each other on the way to the eyes. So we're looking for an X-shaped structure here. And the optic chiasma is right about there. Okay. Now the optic nerves, of course by the name, they transmit impulses to the brain from the retina at the back of the eye, so we can see. So optic nerve here, optic nerve is here. The parietal lobes. So the parietal lobes, they process sensory information regarding the location of parts of the body, as well as interpreting visual information and processing language and math. And then the parietal lobes on this part on the brain are here and here. Okay. Next up is the pons. Now the pons, it links the medulla oblongata and the thalamus, which I will talk about later once the brain is cut into a sagittal view. The pons is involved in the control of breathing, communication between different parts of the brain, and sensations like hearing, taste, and balance. And the pons is this structure right here. This is the pons of the brain. If you can see, this is my pons here. Okay, so next up is the sulcus or the sulci, because there are several of them. And the sulci, they're the grooves between the brain, so right about there. The temporal lobe of the brain is where sound is processed. It's a region where auditory, language, and speech comprehension systems are located. And this is our temporal lobe, temporal lobe. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and move on to actual separation of the brain. So I'm going to pull the cerebellum away from the cerebrum, and we're going to see some bits called the pineal gland and the corpora quadrigemina. So basically I'm just going to pull on these two bits and we're going to make this happen. Okay, so the pulling is done. All right, so now that I've separated the cerebellum from the cerebrum, we have some more anatomy here. This is the cerebrum here. The pineal gland is right here. And then the corpora quadrigemina is right about there. Okay, and then more, so cerebrum, pineal, corpora quadrigemina, and then the cerebellum is right down here. All right, so moving on, I'm now going to separate the cerebral hemispheres that were divided into right and left by the longitudinal fissure. Again, the longitudinal fissure is here. All right, and then here, I'm going to point out some of the cranial nerves that in the human body, well, the 12 of them, control hearing, digestion, chewing sorts of things. So cranial nerve, cranial nerve, cranial nerve, and there's another cranial nerve there. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and proceed, and I'm going to cut the sheep brain at the corpus callosum. So basically just down the center so we can get a sagittal view and again go through some more anatomy. And this is just my scalpel very efficiently cutting through the sheep's brain. Just going to use my scissors to get rid of this. I believe some remnants of the meninges, maybe. Okay. So, I now have a nice half here. And again, I'm going to point out some of the anatomy and, of course, what it does. So, we're going to start with the cerebellum. And the cerebellum is this bit down here, kind of towards the bottom of the back of the brain here. And the cerebellum, again, controls several functions related to movement and coordination. Now, the corpus callosum. The corpus callosum is located here. This is our corpus callosum, and it integrates motor, sensory, and cognitive performances between the cerebral cortex on one side of the brain to the same region on the other side of the brain. So it just makes sure that both hemispheres have the same information. Now the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is here. This is our hypothalamus, and this controls body temperature, hunger, thirst, fatigue, sleep, and the circadian rhythms. Circadian rhythms are what controls our sleep and wake cycle. Okay. Again, the mammillary bodies, in this view, the mammillary body is right about there, and they're part of the diencephalon, which form part of the limbic system, which is involved with emotions and memory. The medulla oblongata is this portion here. This is our medulla oblongata. And this helps regulate breathing, heart and blood vessel function, digestion, sneezing, and swallowing. Our midbrain is located here. And again, the midbrain controls motor movement, movements of the eye, auditory, so hearing, and visual, what I can see, processing. The optic chiasma in this view is here, surprisingly enough. And again, this is our X-shaped structure that's formed at a point below the brain where the two optic nerves cross over each other on the way to the eyes. The pineal gland, it's a very tiny gland, right about there. That's our pineal gland. And the pineal gland produces and regulates some hormones, including melatonin, which plays a role in regulating sleep patterns. The pineal gland also plays a role in mood, which is why vitamin D is so important. So it's shown that to reset your pineal gland, you go outside and get some sunlight, which helps you get some vitamin D, which can help to improve your mood. The pons is up here, and the pons again links the medulla oblongata and the thalamus. It's involved in breathing, communication between different parts of the brain, and sensations like hearing, taste, and balance. The spinal cord is here. So the spinal cord functions primarily in the transmission of nerve signals from the motor cortex of the body. It's a center for coordinating many reflexes and contains reflex arcs, which can independently control reflexes without communicating it elsewhere. And then lastly, the thalamus. The thalamus is right around here. This is our thalamus area. Should be right here, thalamus. And the thalamus, it's a relay center through which sensory nerves transmit signals from the spinal cord and brainstem on the way to the cerebral cortex. So again, this was our sheep brain, top or ventral, bottom or dorsal. This is our sagittal view. I have talked about several structures of the brain and what they do as far as gross anatomy of the central nervous system and how everything functions with human anatomy and physiology as part of the central nervous system. Thank you.